Steve Day's Michigan podcast, breaking down college football for us as we get into bowl season. One of my favorite times of year, even though many of the games considered exhibition games and irrelevant. And one of those would be the Michigan-South Carolina game. But what intrigues me about this, as does any matchup between the Big Ten and the SEC, is just that. The power brokers of college football getting together. And from a Big Ten perspective, there seems to be more of a gap of respectability that needs to be waged of sorts on the field. So this is another attempt for the Big Ten to show that it can play with the SEC, even if we're going 4 or 5 spots down the ladder of each league. Your thoughts about Michigan's selection to play South Carolina in the Outback Bowl? How did it strike you?
I was ecstatic with the matchup, Mark. Last year, I was very concerned. I even predicted Florida State as a touchdown underdog would win the game. The game was in their state. And Michigan had all the hallmarks that we see every year of the team that lays an egg in a bowl. A lot of seniors disappointed with where they ended up. We've seen this with Alabama in the past, for example, in these games. And you saw how slow of a start Michigan had against Florida State in the Orange Bowl last year, where they finally took that lead at the end, and then Florida State ended up winning the game in the final minute. But this time around, we have a very beatable opponent. I've watched South Carolina play several times this year. I think Jake Bentley's a pretty good quarterback, but he's not Mr. Mobility. And you know how Don Brown typically does against guys that need to beat you from the pocket, which is pretty well. You know, no Deebo Samuel. He's been hurt all year, so they don't really have a huge weapon on the outside. Running game's just okay. I think it's a really, really good matchup for us. I think the spread, where I think it's up to about 9.5, I think indicates the odds makers agree. It is a prime piece of real estate from an exposure standpoint. It's basically the lead-in on New Year's Day to the playoff with no other Big Ten teams playing. So, I mean, when you've had as unsatisfying of a season as we have had, which is 8-4 with no significant wins, we could not have asked for a better situation to hopefully end the season with a win, use that as a springboard to next year. You know, you look at, Georgia was 8-5 last year. Now they're in the playoff. You look at, Penn State was 7-5 in 2015. They won the Big Ten last year. Teams change. A lot of teams change a lot in the span of 1 year. We have so many guys coming back. We may end up with, I think, a Jared Stidham, Russell Wilson type of transfer at quarterback and Shea Patterson. So I think this is an extra spring practice to hopefully culminate with a win against a beatable SEC team in front of a pretty large audience on New Year's Day. Man, Mark, given how unsatisfying our season has been, I don't think we could have asked for a better scenario.
It's definitely a fair assessment of what we saw the Wolverines display against Florida State last year. As you mentioned, just looked horrible out of the gate, dominated in the first quarter, had to hurdle the challenges of no Jake Butt, no Jabril Peppers in that game, despite the disappointment and despite getting off to that kind of start. The resiliency of that team to get off the deck and challenge that talented of a team down to the last possession in the last few seconds of the game is to be commended. Now they take on South Carolina, and as you mentioned, the metrics would tell us that this is not an 8-4 football team from the SEC. They have maximized their resources, their talent. They have done everything possible in terms of red zone efficiency on defense, keeping teams within the 20s. The defense is not very good, but it on the scoreboard has played much better than its talent. And so they're still developing down there, certainly still building a program with Will Muschamp. And when they have, as we have seen with those types of teams, those levels of teams, they get exposed against the likes of Clemson. And that was obviously an ugly game very quickly in that game.
Agreed. I think, especially Brandon Peters will start. And I think he has played competently when he has played. And meaning the offense has actually looked like a Harbaugh offense for the only time this season. I mean, his efficiency numbers, every QBR numbers, dramatically superior to Wilton Spates. And everybody says, well, he played Rutgers, Minnesota, etc. The fact of the matter is that When you look at the pass efficiency defense numbers of the teams that Brandon played against, it's actually tougher than the teams that Wilton played against. I mean, at the end of the season, Rutgers and Minnesota, for example, all ended up with better pass efficiency defense rankings than Florida did. So by far, it was the most. I don't think it's any coincidence that when he came in the game, the running game took off, and the running game, and he was competent because the running game took off. Meaning, we actually played complementary football, where we could run plays off of plays as opposed to just kind of trying stuff. So I think if we can play some competent offense, with I think the pressure our defense is going to put on their offensive unit, I don't expect a huge ton of points, but I think it's a game Michigan can win 21-10, 28-17, something like that.